Well, Ambassador Tiankai became ambassador of the People's Republic of China to the United States on April 15th, 2013, having previously served as vice minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2009 to 2013, and previously as ambassador to Japan. In addition, he has served various postings in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including Assistant Minister, Director General of the Department of Asian Affairs, Director General, and Deputy Director General of the Policy Research Office, Deputy Director General and Spokesman at the Information Department, Deputy Division Director, and then Counselor at the Department of International Organizations and Conferences. He was also Minister Counselor at the Chinese Permanent Mission to the United Nations and an interpreter for the Chinese service in the Department for the General Assembly for Conference Management at the UN Secretariat. From 1977 to 78, Ambassador Cui was a teacher at Shanghai Normal University, where he completed his undergraduate and postgraduate studies. He also did postgraduate work at Johns Hopkins University in the United States and with a UN interpreter and translator training course at the Beijing Institute of Foreign Languages. The ambassador is married. His wife is with us today. We welcome her, and they are the parents of one daughter. His presentation today, China-U.S. relations. Please join me in welcoming to BYU Ambassador Cui.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for a very warm introduction. And since so many people raised their hands to indicate they can speak Mandarin, perhaps I could speak in Mandarin as well. But let me try my broken English anyway. It's a real privilege and pleasure for me, for my wife, and my colleague of the Chinese Embassy to be here today at BYU and in the state of Utah. And this is indeed our first visit to Utah and to BYU. And we are very happy to have this precious opportunity to be here. But I first got to know something about BYU that was, I think, over more than 30 years ago. In the late 1970s, and there was a TV broadcast of the young ambassador's performance from BYU in China. That was my first opportunity to be exposed to American culture, to the beautiful singing and dancing provided by BYU here. So ever since then, I have had the dream that someday I could come here, have a look at the campus, have a look at the people here. And I always wondered how the real place would look like. Now today, here I am in the Wonderland. And for the last 2 days, Dr. Peterson has been a wonderful host, bringing us everywhere in Utah. We had a good meeting with the governor, had a very good discussion with the legislature, and had a luncheon with the business community. And this morning we went to a wonderful elementary school with dual language immersion program. The kids are so impressive. With just a couple of years of learning of the language, they can already write Chinese characters, which is not easy even for Chinese kids. So, in a sense, I'm a bit worried what kind of an audience I will be facing today. You have such wonderful elementary students. Imagine what kind of university students you have. And I've been ambassador in Washington, D.C. for over 2.5 years. And this is still my first visit to BYU, so I'm coming a little bit too late. But there's no better timing, on the other hand, because just 10 days ago, President Xi Jinping of China concluded his successful state visit to the United States. So there's no better timing for me to talk about relations between China and the United States. And during the state visit, President Xi Jinping and President Obama had long hours of strategic dialogue between them, and they reached a number of agreements. They agreed that the two countries should continue to endeavor to build a new model of major country relationship based on mutual respect and win-win cooperation. They also agree that we should promote more high-level exchanges, dialogue, and cooperation at various levels. We should expand our cooperation at bilateral, regional, and international levels. And we should manage our differences in a constructive way. And the two sides should work even harder to bring about more concrete results so as to benefit the people of the two countries and the entire world. So at the end of the visit, the two governments announced a long list of 49 items as outcomes of this visit. And they cover a wide range of areas: economic and trade, finance, mutual investment, energy, environmental protection, science and technology, civil aviation, infrastructure building, agriculture, public health, military-to-military relations, education, and what we call subnational cooperation, which actually means cooperation at the state and city level. And also better coordination and communication on international regional issues. So it was quite a successful and fruitful visit. But I think the most important signal both governments sent out during the visit was that China and the United States should be partners in cooperation rather than rivalries in confrontation. I think that is most important message from the two presidents. So today I want to touch upon 3 points against this background. First, why China and the United States should cooperate with each other. Second, what can be achieved through China-US cooperation. Number 3, how can China and the United States cooperate better? First, why? Why should our two countries cooperate with each other? First, this is in our mutual interest. Because our two economies are highly interdependent. Last year, the bilateral trade was more than 550 billion US dollars. And mutual investment is now already over $100 billion. So when the US economy is growing very well, it's good news for the Chinese economy. And when the Chinese economy registers strong growth rate, it's good news for the US economy. So we are really in the same boat. Besides, both countries are pursuing domestic reform, economic restructuring, upgrading of infrastructure, and a lot of other domestic reform agenda. So it will certainly help each other if we can work with each other. Cooperation will make each country better able to achieve its success on domestic agenda. Number 2, this is a shared responsibility. China and the United States are both permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So we share responsibility to maintain international peace and security, to address regional conflicts, to engage in counterterrorism, non-proliferation, peacekeeping operation by the United Nations. We do share responsibilities for international peace. Economically, we are the two largest economies in the world. China and the United States put together will account for 1/3 of the global total economic output, 1/4 of the world population, and 1/5 of international trade. So we are really the heavyweights. So we share responsibilities to make sure that the global economy is growing stronger in a more balanced way, and there's greater stability in international finance, and the multilateral trading system is strengthened. And in terms of global challenges, we certainly share responsibility to respond to these challenges like climate change, disease control, response to natural disasters. All these challenges cannot be handled single-handedly by any single country, United States or China. That's just impossible. And of course, even if our two countries cooperate with each other, we cannot guarantee that the two countries will be able to solve all these problems. But without our cooperation, none of them could be managed. That is quite clear. Number three, it's very simple that we do not have any alternative. We have to cooperate with each other. Imagine if our two countries fall into confrontation with each other, what kind of consequences we'll have to face. And it will be disaster for people of our two countries, and it will certainly be disaster for the entire world. And the only result would be lose-lose. So it's quite clear why our two countries should cooperate with each other, for bilateral reasons, for our responsibility to the global community, and for lack of any better alternative. Then what can be achieved through cooperation between China and the United States? A simple answer would be a great deal. We are already working with each other on so many fronts, from trade to investment, from macroeconomic policy coordination to global economic governance, from clean energy to infrastructure building, from agriculture to food security and food safety, from science and technology to innovation, from climate change to environmental protection, from disease control to disaster prevention, from military to military exchanges to people contact, from counterterrorism to non-proliferation, from the Iranian nuclear issue to the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, from reconstruction in Afghanistan to development in African countries, and from bilateral cooperation to regional and multilateral cooperation. I think a good example of fruitful and constructive cooperation is our cooperation on climate change. People used to believe China and the United States, being one as the biggest developed country, the other as the biggest developing country, should be at the opposite ends, at the opposite sides on the issue of climate change. But last November, during President Obama's state visit to China, the two presidents issued a joint statement to announce cooperation of our two countries on climate change. And this year, during the visit by President Xi last month, they issued another presidential statement on cooperation in response to climate change. And this kind of cooperation, first of all, really helped our respective countries to deal with the issue of climate change. But what is more important, it is a game changer for international negotiations on climate change. I think you might be aware that there will be a major international conference in Paris, France, in December to conclude important international negotiations on climate change. Since our two countries have committed ourselves to closer coordination and cooperation on this issue, so the possibility is much better for the Paris conference to succeed. Another example is what we had in Africa last year, the Ebola. Last year, when some of the Western African countries were hit by Ebola, both China and the United States responded. And fortunately, we coordinated our assistance to African countries. And we cooperated on the ground, which did a great deal to help the African people. And also give ourselves much better confidence that we can cooperate with each other on such emergency issues and in countries in West Africa. At the time, I went to the White House to meet my counterparts there, and I showed them pictures of Chinese plane unloading materials of assistance to Liberia, and American soldiers were helping us. It was a very good picture of the two military working with each other side by side to help the African people. So these two examples show that the possibility for cooperation is just there. And if we can make best use of it, what kind of achievements we can have. That will bring me to my third point. How can we cooperate with each other even better? The first thing I would suggest is to further enhance mutual confidence, mutual trust, especially about each other's strategic intentions. We should make sure that nobody would question the strategic intentions of the other country just because of some specific issues or specific differences. As far as China is concerned, China will continue down the path of peaceful development. China has no intention, no capability to challenge the U.S. global position. We are willing and ready to work with the United States in the Asia-Pacific region for positive interaction and inclusive cooperation. And China is committed to maintain, participate in, and contribute to the current international order. We have no intention to have a revolution against the current international order because we benefit from it and we are just part of it. Of course, we do share a common task with the United States and maybe others to reform the existing international regime so that it will be more effective, will function better, and more responsive to the needs of the 21st century. For China itself, I think the most important task for China is to have further domestic, economic, and social development to achieve the goal of modernization of the country. So the people will have a better life. But the challenges are just huge. There are mountains of problems within China. For instance, China's per capita GDP is just about $7,800 per year, which is about 2/3 of the global average level, 1/7 of that of the United States. If we could have a ranking of the countries, China would be about in the position of 80 or even lower. Even today, if the poverty line is $1 per day, then China would have over 70 million people still living under this poverty line. If the poverty line is $2 per day, then we have over 200 million people living under this poverty line. You can see the domestic challenge is so huge for China, and China has to preoccupy itself with effective response to such challenges and make sure that the 1.3 billion people will have a better life, will have better prospects, their kids would have better education, better medical care, and better opportunities for jobs. This is a huge challenge for any government. So despite all the possible media stories and so on, I hope people here will not be scared by some alarmist talks about China, so-called China challenging the global position of the United States. My second suggestion would be we have to learn to manage our differences in a very constructive way. China and the United States are very different countries. We have very different history, cultural heritage. We are at very different stages of economic development. We have different political systems. So naturally, there are differences between our two countries. But the key is to recognize that our common interest is much larger than any possible differences we might have. And this common interest is still growing. So we should not allow differences to dominate our bilateral agenda. We should have creative ways to turn the differences into possibilities and opportunities for cooperation, for complementarity. And we should really manage the differences which cannot be resolved for the time being. We should manage them in a very constructive way. For instance, cybersecurity has been an issue between our two countries. But actually, I always believe this is a new area that calls for closer cooperation and coordination between our two countries. Because the United States is the most advanced country in terms of IT technology. China has the largest number of users of internet. But unfortunately, there is still no internationally agreed rules of behavior in this area. And because of the advancement of technology, some people, the hackers, could attack cyberspace from anywhere in the world, in any capacity. So there's a real need for our two countries to have a better understanding of each other's situation, each other's needs in cyberspace, and try to work out a set of common rules to govern activities in this new area, in this new frontier, so that both our countries, both our economies, and both our peoples will make best use of cyberspace, will benefit from it, and at the same time will reduce the vulnerability of both countries to cyber attacks. Unfortunately, we had a good start. Just before the president's visit, the two governments agreed to set up a high-level dialogue mechanism to handle related issues. So whenever there is a case of cyber attack, the two countries will provide each other with more information, more evidence, will help each other in the investigation, and hopefully will help each other in handling such cases. So I'm quite confident that if we can persist in such cooperation, the prospects will be good for our two countries in cyberspace. My third suggestion would be to give full play to the potentials of cooperation. As I said earlier, cooperation is what the realities call for. And we do have common interests to be developed in such cooperation. If we can make full use of such potential, both countries will be in a better position to handle its domestic agenda and to work on international agenda. So in that regard, I hope the two governments will speed up the negotiations on the bilateral investment treaty. Because business communities in both countries, they are calling for such stronger, more effective, more transparent legal framework for mutual investment. And there's such enthusiasm by Chinese business to invest in the United States. And the US investment in China has been going on for quite a few decades, and many American companies benefit from it. So if we can conclude our work on the bilateral investment treaty at an early date, it will do a great deal to help business communities of both countries to be more successful, to have greater access to markets, and certainly to be more competitive internationally. We also have to expand our cooperation into new areas, such as clean energy, green development, anti-corruption, infrastructure building, and cooperation and coordination in Asia-Pacific region and on global issues. And last but not least, I would suggest that we should put more stress on subnational cooperation and people-to-people exchanges. I think there the potential is really great and the prospects could be very good. Already we have 43 pairs of sister provinces, states between our two countries, and over 200 pairs of sister cities between our two countries. We already have a governors forum, which had its third session last month in Seattle during President Xi's visit. And a few American states like California, Iowa, Texas, Michigan, state of Washington, and city of Chicago, they have already set up joint working group on mutual investment and trade between them and Chinese provinces and cities. We will be very happy to see more mechanisms like this to be set up between our states and provinces and cities. And also, one of the outcomes for the present visit is that there's agreement between the two governments to set up cooperation mechanism between state legislatures of the two countries. And they will have their first forum next year. And in terms of people-to-people exchanges, I think there are already the official number, which is maybe not so accurate, but already over 270,000 Chinese students studying here. If we count those who have already returned to China, it could be well over 1.5 million. And a few years ago, the US side started an initiative they call 100,000 Strong, which means they will send over 100,000 American students to study in China. Now this goal has already been reached. Now we are working on a more ambitious goal, which they call 1 million strong. And the Chinese government has committed to help to sponsor over 50,000 students from both countries to study in each other's country in the next 3 years. So it's quite a huge number. This kind of people-to-people exchanges, especially among the young people, I think is the most powerful force for long-term friendship and cooperation between our two countries. I think this is where the real strength of our relationship lies. I was very much moved and encouraged by our visit this morning to Cascade Elementary School with the dual language immersion program. Watching these kids, 6 or 7 years old, maybe the oldest 12 years old, with just a couple of years of learning of the Chinese language, they can already sing Chinese songs, write Chinese characters, having conversation with us in Chinese. It's really encouraging. Just imagine when these kids grow up and come to BYU, what kind of students you will have. And when they graduate from BYU, they take up jobs in business, in government, in culture, in whatever, in education. What kind of input they will have for the relationship what kind of a positive force they will be. So I think this is where the real strength of our long-term relationship really lies. So I'm very much encouraged by my visit to Utah and to BYU. As I told our host during the luncheon, that I will go back to Washington, D.C. more confident, more optimistic about this relationship. So thank you very much for your help. Thank you very much for your inspiration. Thank you. I think I would perhaps stop here and take the question. Thank you. Yeah, please.
So in the interest of time, we'd ask you to be bold and come over here to the left side, my left, and form a line to begin to ask questions with the few minutes that we have. And when you begin, first tell us your name and what you're studying, and then you can ask your question, and then you can wait until you receive your answer before going back to your seat. So please.
We still have 15 minutes, right?
Yes.
Good. I hope I have not spoken too long. Okay, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me? Cool. 不知道我是否能允许用中文问你一个问题啊 Can I ask him in Chinese or do I need to speak English? 可以，行，好。你曾经说过，对，首先我叫戴瑞，然后我是这个大学本科生，我是双专业，一个经济，一个中文。然后你曾经说过，那个日本与中国存在一个，就是说日本与中国的对外关系存在一个很大的障碍。就是说，日本可能有点难认可一个强大的中国。我想问，你觉得美国存在一个同样的问题吗？就是美国人也可能有点难认可一个强大的中国吗？
You want my answer in Chinese or in English?
我觉得中文没事儿，但是我不知道那个。
Well, let me try. Let me try my English, if you permit. First of all, between China and Japan. A few years ago, I was the Chinese ambassador in Tokyo. I always believe there's very strong and lasting support for much better relations between China and Japan among the people of the two countries. So I don't think we should listen to the Japanese politicians too much. Because everywhere I went in Japan, we were so warmly received by the Japanese people. They are so kind, so friendly, and they have a very strong admiration of Chinese culture. And they really have a friendly feeling towards the Chinese people, and they want to have better relations. And economically, Chinese and Japanese economies are very closely interdependent. So when the financial crisis broke out in early 2009, I went back to China in my capacity as a Chinese ambassador. I visited over a dozen Japanese companies in China, operating in China. All of them were still making money in the Chinese market. But the headquarters in Tokyo were having a very bad time. So I think the economic mutual needs is clearly there. And now China is so engaged in seeking sustainable and environmentally sound development. I think our best example would be Japan, perhaps not the United States. So I still believe in the long run, we will have a much better relationship with Japan. Then for relations between China and the United States, I remember my president emphasized time and again that the Pacific is big enough to accommodate both China and the United States to grow stronger. And I think he's just right. Thank you.
崔大使你好，我叫于琛，我来自中国洛阳。然后，我们很高兴习大大这次访美，然后很高兴您和太太的今天来给我们做这个讲座。我有一个家常的问题啊，您有没有尝一下美国的快餐？你喜欢吗？Do you like American fast food?
Yeah. Maybe to be fair, I should try to answer this question in Chinese.
I just want to make more people understanding. That's why I'm translating.
OK，当然我最喜欢的还是中国饭，
Me too.
但是我也很喜欢美国的一些快餐。我觉得他们首先它的标准是全世界一样的，
Yeah.
所以你不管在哪里去吃美国快餐，你知道你会吃到什么。另外 ，maybe I should not say this in Utah or in BYU, but I said this in Seattle, in Washington State. There are a couple of Starbucks coffee shops close to China's foreign ministry. I think they made a lot of money from me. But whenever I'm at home, whenever I want to do some good reading, I will still have a cup of green tea.
OK 好，我有一个真正的问题啊，就是对，因为我学的是商科，我很高兴您提到那个全球标准化。然后我们知道现在中国的经济正在进行改革和产业结构调整，所以我想问一下，中国未来经济的有哪些发展方向？
For the Chinese economy, I think the first thing we have to do is to restructure it. We cannot go on forever relying on labor-intensive technologies and sectors with a very a huge amount of consumption of raw materials, a lot of damage to the environment. We cannot go on like this. And we cannot maintain double-digit growth rate forever. I don't think the planet can really support such a growth pattern or consumption pattern. We have to pursue low carbon growth, green development, to be more energy efficient, to consume less raw materials, and so on and so forth. So I think this is the paramount goal for the Chinese economy. But at the same time, during the transformation period, we have to make sure people still have their jobs. This is also important. So this is a very hard choice among many hard choices China is faced now.
谢谢你们回答。
Thank you.
谢谢您过来 BYU。那我的问题就是这样子，我从小到现在一直听我的父母讲啊，你要付美国的债。我们知道美国有一个很大很大的债那中国人对这个债有什么看法？
Well, I think this is one example of globalization. You have some debt and others have some surpluses, and you buy things or you sell things and others would buy. So that's why we're so interdependent. That's why when the US economy is strong, people feel at ease in China. People feel happy in China. And when you have bad news in your economy, people are worried about the treasury bond we have in China. Of course, it will take some time for people to change their consumption pattern. In China, we have to encourage people to spend more, to consume more. But we have to make sure that they have better confidence for the future. We have a better medical care system, better social benefit system, and better access to education and so on, so that people don't have to worry, don't have to save too much for the future. They could spend now. But maybe in the United States, you should save more and spend a little bit less. But please continue to buy Chinese goods.
那么最后，大部分的中国人相信有一天我们会付我们的债吗？
I think as long as Americans have confidence in America's self, we in China don't have to worry about that.
那就太好了，谢谢您。
所以大师你好，
你好。
那我用英文来问这个问题好。
Please.
So you talked about corporate cooperation instead of a competition between the United States and China. And I have this fear, and the fear is that the differences between the United States and China might cause kind of a friction where you have the United States saying one thing and then you have China saying, we're not trying to compete or be the next big world power, et cetera, whereas I think there could be a communication gap there because on the front, the leaders of the country might say one thing, but behind what they express on the outside, there might be a little bit different intention behind what they're expressing, if that makes sense. So I guess my question is about maybe the disconnect or the difference between what's expressed on the outside versus the intention that the leaders of the two countries might have behind that intention.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right. Communication and true mutual understanding is not so easy to come by. Sometimes there's some good news, then at the same time you have a lot of very negative stories. And sometimes people just don't believe what you are saying. You say you have no intention to challenge the United States. Who knows? Maybe someday, maybe in a few years' time, when you are stronger, you will change your mind. So I think on the one hand, it's only natural that people will have such doubts or suspicion or questions. On the other hand, we have to look at the realities. We have to look at today's world, the world in the 21st century, which is certainly different from the world in the 19th century or even in the early 20th century. Today we are so interconnected. As I mentioned earlier, we are faced with so many global challenges. No single country can handle these challenges single-handedly. And we have to cooperate with each other, despite all the differences we might have. For instance, the relations between US and Russia are not so smooth right now. But still, US, Russia, China, France, Britain, the European Union, we work together successfully on the Iranian nuclear issue. We reached that agreement. So the reality calls for closer coordination among the major powers. But this cooperation is based on full recognition of the differences we might have. So as I said earlier, the key is to learn to manage the differences in a constructive way so they will not overshadow cooperation. They will not dominate our agenda. And we have to do a much better job to communicate to each other. For instance, for us in the embassy, we have to do a much better job to present the real China to the American people. Why China has no intention to challenge the United States? Why China seeks cooperation with the US? What are the factors determining this kind of position? We have to do a better job in doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
你好, I don't really speak Mandarin, that's all I know. My name's Sierra, I'm an international relations major. Currently, the US has a lot of debt towards China, about 1.2 trillion, and you have much of our business and our imports. I love buying Chinese products from eBay. How do you think we can solve this debt to your country?
Well, I think, first of all, we would very much welcome more imports from the United States to China. And actually, this has been part of the discussion between the two governments for quite a few years, because there are still restrictions on high-tech products from the United States to China for civilian use. We want the US government to remove and lift, or at least reduce, such restrictions on civilian products, high-tech products, export to China. That will greatly increase US export to China and will help you to reduce the debt. And at the same time, there's such a growing enthusiasm by the Chinese business to invest in the United States. But again, we are faced with some political obstacles. There's excessive, if I'm permitted to use this word, there are excessive security checks. And many of the investment requests are denied on security grounds without any specification. So if such unnecessary obstacles could be removed, I think Chinese investment in the United States maybe will grow by a great margin, will even double or even grow more than that. And that will create jobs here. That will create income here. That will help us to balance the economic relations between the countries.
Absolutely. How do you say thank you?
谢谢.
谢谢.
Thank you.
My name is Brady Wolf. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
My question is, considering the fact that you've come to visit BYU, which is a Christian university, and knowing that a few decades ago China had very little religious influence, my question is, for the future society of China, what role do you feel that religion, including Christianity, will play?
I think religion, I'm not an expert on religion, I have to confess, but I think it's part of the civilization. As long as there is need by the people for it, it will exist, it will grow, it will evolve, it will change with the changing world.
And do you feel that China's government and politics will allow for further permissiveness of religion in China?
Actually, there are a huge number of believers in China, believers in different religions, of course, Buddhism, Christianity, and you see Muslim and so on and so forth. And a few years ago, I visited a printing shop in Nanjing. I know you have a cooperation with Nanjing University. They told me they are the biggest printing shop for Bibles in the world.
Oh, wow.
They gave me as a gift a very, very good copy of the Bible, I think with 7 or 8 languages. Maybe someday you could go there and have a look. They will also give you a copy of this Bible in 7 or 6 languages.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Master.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.